Hi, this is Chip Kirkpatrick. I'm a metal detectorist and a history buff, and I want to welcome you to my second video, which I'm calling Keep It in the Family. And in a little while, you'll understand why it has that title. And by the way, like I said, this is my second video. My first one was called In the Footprints of Gangsters. If you like this one, please go and watch that one. If you don't like this one, please go and watch the other one anyway, and maybe you'll like it better. But today's episode is about the greatest find I have ever made. And unless I find Jimmy Hoffa, the Loch Ness Monster, or the Holy Grail, it will continue to be the greatest find of my life. Now, I live in Yulee, Florida, in Northeast Florida, just north of Jacksonville, just west of Amelia Island and Fernandina Beach, and south of Kings Bay and St. Mary's, Georgia. The whole area is full of history, and it's a great place to be a metal detectorist. I was invited to hunt a private property on the Florida-Georgia border, and I didn't find a whole lot. But in one spot, I found a couple of crushed cans, and not far away from that, I found what I believed was the lid to one of those cans. Couldn't really tell what it was, though, because it was entirely encapsulated in a thick layer of hard as a rock dried on black mud. But it was right size, right shape, right thickness. And you know, if something looks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, you can be pretty sure it's going to be a duck. And so I assumed this was a can lid, and I dropped it into my trash bucket. When I got home, I always empty out my trash bucket. Now, I recycle all the scrap metal. And so I've got barrels for the iron, for the brass, and so forth. And that means I've got to take everything that I find and sort it, which is extra work, but I don't mind because there have been a number of occasions when I've picked up something and maybe it was in different lighting, a different angle, maybe some dirt fell off of it, and I realized something that I thought was trash really wasn't. So I have my can lid, and normally I would just flip it back and forth once or twice and then toss it into the barrel. But for whatever reason, I went back and forth 3 or 4 times. And I got ready to toss it, and just as I was getting ready to release it, some of that mud broke off. And what I saw coming out of it was a loop. Now, I've seen plenty of can lids, and I've never seen one with a loop. So I thought maybe I would clean it up a little bit and just get a better understanding of what it really was. And by the way, that loop, if you were a jeweler, would be called a bail. That's B-A-I-L. And the purpose of a bail is so that you can run a ribbon, a string, or a chain through it, and then wear the object as jewelry or a decoration. Anyway, I took it into my workshop. I got a soft bristle toothbrush, and I was just holding it and scrubbing away on it, and I'm kind of looking around my workshop, things I need to do and so forth, not paying a whole lot of attention. And after a minute or so, I glanced down at it, and I saw that I had gotten down to bare metal on a small part of it. And what I saw really shocked me. First of all, I saw that the metal was tarnished. Now, can lids will rust. They don't tarnish. There are very few metals that do tarnish, but one of them is silver, and it turns out that's what this disc is made of. The second thing I saw was that it was engraved. Now, not machine stamping, but actual hand engraving by somebody with more than a little bit of artistic skill. But most shocking of all, there were 3 words in Gaelic. Now, if you're Scottish, you know what I mean by Gaelic. It was the language of the Highlanders. And I am of Scottish descent, but I don't know a whole lot of Gaelic. In fact, my knowledge is limited to just 3 words, which happen to be the same 3 words that were on this disc. And they are I mock sicker. And I know that in all the world, there's probably only 2 groups of people that would understand the significance of those 3 words. The first would be Scottish historians. Anybody who has seriously studied Scottish history would be likely to understand the significance of those words. And if they didn't, at the very least, they would be familiar with the people and the chain of events that circled around that phrase. Because in 1305, I'm sorry, 1306 rather. Those three words put a king on the throne of Scotland. The second group of people who would be even more familiar with that phrase would be members of the Kirkpatrick family. My family, my gang, my group, my posse, whatever you want to call us. Because we know that it was a Kirkpatrick who said those three words that put a king on the throne of Scotland. Now the story is this. 1306, Robert the Bruce was desperately trying to become king. But he had a very fierce opponent, another noble by the name of John Comyn. And Comyn is spelled C-O-M-Y-N. There were two John Comyns, father and son. The father went by the name of Black Comyn and Junior Red Comyn. And Red was the one that was giving Bruce such a hard time. After William Wallace was defeated at Falkirk, he gave up his guardianship of Scotland, and these two men were made co-guardians. And that didn't work out at all, because they couldn't agree on anything. And at one gathering of the nobles, Comyn actually struck Bruce, which was a tremendous social faux pas back then. Well, Comyn learned that Bruce was drawing up plans for a rebellion. And he stayed mum about it until Bruce went to England to take care of family business. And he then sent word to King Edward I, who in a fit of rage sent men to arrest Bruce. And had they been successful, no doubt he would have soon been beheaded. Because back then they beheaded the nobles, they hung the commoners like us. But somebody got to him first, warned him, and he slipped back over the border. Well, he then sends a message to Comyn that basically said, this country needs a king, should be one of us. Let's see if we can't negotiate and come to terms. And he offered that if Comyn would allow him to take the throne, he would sign all of the Bruce properties over to the Comyn family, making them tremendously wealthy. Or Comyn could do likewise and take the throne. But what he proposed was that the two men would meet alone and unarmed at the altar of the Greyfriars Church in Dumfries. And Comyn agrees, because the church was considered a place of safety and sanctuary, and he could not be harmed. So they met at the door. Each of them had several attendees with them, trusted family and friends. On Bruce's side was Sir Roger Kirkpatrick, one of my ancestors, who was Bruce's cousin and very good friend. The two men were disarmed and sent in. Nobody knows exactly what happened, but Bruce got his hands on a dagger and stabbed Comyn, and then ran out of the church. When he burst out of the church, Kirkpatrick sees him covered in blood, quickly finds out it's not his and that it belongs to Comyn. And he asks the fateful question, is Comyn dead? Because if he isn't, Bruce is going to be in a world of trouble. All the other nobles will band against him, and he will get nowhere in his quest to be king. Bruce replies, I don't think so. Kirkpatrick says, you doubt? I mock sicker, which means I make sure. He pulls his dagger, goes into the church, coming out moments later with a bloody dagger, and according to some versions, with Comyn's head. But at that time, they then have to kill the rest of Comyn's men, and the two men flee, trying to avoid the Comyn family and the authorities. Now, my family crest has a hand on top holding aloft a bloody dagger. The shield has 3 pillows, not because we're world-class nap takers, although I might be, but instead because the two men slept in the woods for 3 nights, avoiding being captured. Below that is the motto, I mock sicker. Not long after this, Bruce goes to the church. And for political reasons, they allow him to become king, and they crown him on the spot. They should have excommunicated him. But They saw the political advantages of having him on their side. So you can imagine my shock at seeing this engraved on this piece of metal that I have just found and nearly threw away. So I quickly began cleaning the rest of the disc. And what I found were a number of mottos, phrases, and icons that I was pretty sure were Scottish in nature. I tried Googling to find out what I could about it, but there was very little information. So what I did was I took a bunch of photographs and I drew up a whole list of questions. And for a number of months, I spent practically every spare moment I had doing research on researchers. Because I wanted to send these photos and these questions to people that were much more knowledgeable about Scottish history than I would be, and in the hopes that they could answer my questions. And I started with the three big museums, the Smithsonian, the British Royal Museum, the Scottish National Museum, and then worked my way down to lesser ones. I then watched a whole bunch of documentaries, read a bunch of articles and books, and sent the questions and the photographs to the various historians that were involved in that. I mean, even at one point, my wife was watching Antique Roadshow on public television, and there was a man with a collection of 19th century silver Scottish jewelry, and the man who was appraising it sounded like he knew what he was talking about. And so I tracked him down and sent him the same question. He was actually very, very helpful. Now, this is one side of it, and this is the other side. Let me tell you real quickly what these different things mean according to the experts that responded back. On the front side, at the very top, there are three symbols. There are two plants and a lion. The lion has always been a symbol for Scotland. On the left side of the lion is a plant called rue. It's R-E-W or R-U-E, and it's a medicinal herb. On the right side is a thistle, which is the national flower of Scotland. And the reason it's the national flower is, according to legend, a Viking army invaded Scotland, and the Vikings were sneaking up on the Scots as they slept. And to be more stealthy, some of them removed their footgear. And just before launching their attack, one of them stepped down on a thistle. And the thistle has very sharp, spiny leaves, and he cried out. It woke the Scots and prevented them from being slaughtered in their sleep. It's been told to me that those three items were on the very first Scottish crest. Beneath that is what we thought was a name. It looks like it says Tutchin or Tuchin, I or J Pierce. I Googled the dickens out of old Tuchin trying to find something about him. Nothing came up. Then somebody sent me a message saying it's not a name, it's a motto. It's touch and I pierce. Sort of a medieval don't tread on me. Now, what's interesting about that is, and this I did not know, that was another Kirkpatrick family motto used during the Wallace Wars, because we were related to William Wallace and apparently played a rather integral part in his efforts to defeat the English. And then beneath that is the date August 23rd, 1299, and the initials WW. No one has disputed that the initials are for William Wallace. The date, though, is a bit of a mystery. August 23rd, 1299 was apparently a do-nothing date globally because there's nothing that occurred on that. But I was offered two possible explanations for that date. After Wallace's defeat at Falkirk, he left Scotland, went to France, and tried to get the French to assist the Scots in fighting the English. He was there for several years. He was unsuccessful, and then he came back to Scotland. There is no record of when he left and when he returned. However, one expert suggested maybe this was one of those two events. But the question then came up, why would it be on this disk and nowhere else? A more likely explanation is the fact that the date of Wallace's execution was August 23rd, 1305. Now, this disc was made several hundred years after that event, so it's possible that the person who did the engraving simply made a mistake. Now, on the other side of it, first of all, at the top is a symbol representing an hourglass. The hourglass is typically used on tombstones to mean the passing of time. However, it is believed that it was used on this to mean our time will come, because further down is a heart with an arrow through it. And that was one of the secret symbols used by the Jacobites. Anytime you see a heart that is pierced in any form or fashion, be it an arrow, knives, thorns, or whatever, it reflects the heartbreak of the Battle of Culloden, when the Jacobite effort was completely crushed by the British and the Campbell family. Above that is the phrase, "None shall provoke me with impunity." This is pretty much the national motto of Scotland. For one thing, it is the motto of the Order of the Thistle, which is second only to the Order of the Garter used in England, kind of a very secret, exclusive society, reflecting knighthood and chivalry and so on. I did send them an application for membership, and thus far I have not heard anything back on it. But it's also the motto for a number of Scottish military units and at least one American unit as well. Then there is a very strange symbol on here that everybody believes initially is a metal detector. But metal detectors weren't made at this time. The squiggly lines on the right side of this symbol is, to me, a rose, and the rose was a symbol for England. And the rose is being attacked, and there are three explanations I was given as to what that attacking is being done by. One person thought it might have been the lance of a unicorn, and the unicorn was a symbol for Scotland. But unlike any unicorn I've ever seen, maybe they grew them differently over there. The second option was that it was a crowned horse with a lance, and the meaning would be that a Scottish noble had defeated an English noble in a joust. But I got several responses back saying, no, it is a gloved hand holding a sword that is stabbing the rose. And the whole idea is to express the hatred that the Scots had for the British. But it was also commented that the fact that the hand is gloved shows that this was once owned by a nobleman, because at this point in time, only the nobles could afford to protect their hands. And another historian responded back, it was obviously owned by a nobleman because the amount of silver in the disc would have been about 8 months' worth of wages for a common worker. And then, of course, below that is the phrase I told you about, I mock sicker. Now, it's at this point that people say, well, how could it possibly have ended up over here? Well, around 1731, James Oglethorpe forms the colony of Georgia. And one of the tasks that he was facing was to prevent the Spanish of St. Augustine from advancing north into South Carolina. And to prevent that, he needed a strong military force. So he recruited a bunch of Scottish Highlanders and brought them to Georgia. They formed a militia, and they also formed the town of Darien, which is about 75 miles north of me. One of the first things they did was to go to Amelia Island, which Oglethorpe named, to avenge the murder of two Scots by Indians that were friendly to and supplied by the Spanish. And if you notice, there is a crease in the metal here. It was expressed that it very possibly was damaged in combat and lost until I was lucky enough to come across it. Now, there is a historian in Australia who has written a book about the Kirkpatricks who said that she believes that this medallion was used as a political tool, that there are two different political stances expressed on it. On one side, on the front, is support of Wallace, and on the back, support of the Jacobites. And I forgot to mention, by the way, that one of my ancestors was actually captured and executed for being a Jacobite and his lands seized. And she said that she believed that the owner of this would wear it concealed in his clothes when he was around strangers until he got a feel for the politics of the group. And then once he did, he would pull it out and wear it one side or the other up. If that isn't enough, recently I got some messages from another historian. His specialty is the study of early American and Scottish engravings. And he is considered to be the world's foremost authority on hidden messages. One of his colleagues sent him pictures of this. And he reported to me that it is literally covered with hidden messages that he is tracing back to the Freemasons. He's pointed out several of them. Quite frankly, I can't make them out, with the exception of one. It appears that in the center of that rose is a replica of the Masonic all-seeing eye. Just adds to the mystery and the mystique of this. But, as I said, this is the greatest find I've ever made. And thank you for watching. Hello, and welcome to Keeping It in the Family. My name is Chip Kirkpatrick. I'm a metal detectorist and a history buff. And today I want to share with you...
Sorry, hang on one second while you're